שלום לכולם, כאן אורלי בר-קימה מהשראה פרקטית. אני שמחה לארח אתכם שוב בתוכנית שלי, תוכנית שבה אני מארחת מורים רוחניים, אנשי רוח, אנשי מדע מכל העולם, במטרה להעלות את רמת המודעות בעולם, ובאמת לדבר על הנושאים החשובים, להרחיב את התודעה שלנו לדברים ולנושאים חדשים. והיום אני מארחת בתוכנית את לין מקטאגרט מאנגליה, אמריקאית שחיה באנגליה, שהיא עיתונאית, סופרת וערכה עשרות ניסויים בנושא של התודעה האנושית, כולל ניסוי אחד פה בירושלים במסגרת הסרט השדה של הבמאית ציפי, שאנחנו מיד כמובן נדבר עליו, ועל הספרים שלה ועל עבודה הנפלאה שהיא עושה בעולם. אז עכשיו אני עוברת לדבר באנגלית. So, hello, Lynne McTaggart, and thank you for being with us on the Practical Inspiration Show. I just said a few words in Hebrew, and I welcome you to our show and to our community, Practical Inspiration.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here with you.
So, I heard about you from a friend, ציפי, and I heard about your experiment in Jerusalem in the 9th of November. And I was very intrigued by your work and all the experiments with consciousness that you do in the world. And of course, we will talk about them and about your new book, The Power of Eight, that just came out. And first of all, I would like you a little bit to introduce yourself to my viewers who don't know you. I said a few words in Hebrew, that you were a journalist and you are a writer and you have published 6 books. This is your 6th one?
7.
7th one, wow. So, and the work that you do in the world, that you make experiments with consciousness. So, please tell me about you a little bit and what brought you to make these experiments in the world. What is it about?
Okay, well, I started out my work as an investigative reporter. I'm a journalist as well as an author. And I run with my husband a magazine called What Doctors Don't Tell You, which has been running for 28 years. In fact, I think there was an Israeli version of it as a newsletter. But we are now a magazine and we're in 16 countries. Now, back in the 1990s, I was very interested in one bit of medical research, because we look at the medical research to find out what works and what doesn't work in conventional and alternative medicine. And from there, we help our readers to determine how to take control of their own health. Now, back in that early 90s, I kept coming across very good studies of spiritual healing and, distant healing. And I kept thinking to myself, if you can take a thought and send it to someone else and make them better, that on its own undermines everything we think about how the world works. So I wanted to find out.
This is what the doctors didn't tell us?
Well, this became my first book in this area called The Field, because I wanted to ask a lot of frontier scientists why this could be, what in our body, what mechanism allows this to happen. And what I discovered in interviewing many of these frontier scientists is that they were all on the verge of some amazing discoveries, discovering that we are much more connected. We are connected by a quantum field, that our bodies operate very differently, that we have extended human potential, and particularly that consciousness is an actual something with the capacity to change physical matter. So I wrote this book, The Field, and in fact, I think The Field is in Hebrew. But I was intrigued by this whole idea, and I kept thinking, as a journalist does, I'd heard many things.
It was a journalism curiosity, or something, you had your own healing to experience in order for you to go and check it with the scientists.
No, it was just journalistic curiosity. I wanted to find out why. And then after I published The Field, I was really interested in the whole idea about this thoughts are things that can affect other things. And being a journalist, I'd heard lots of things about the law of attraction, but the journalist in me was saying things like, well, how far can we take this? Can we cure cancer with our thoughts? And also,
because we are journalists, I'm a journalist myself, and we need the five senses. We need to see, we need to touch, we need to write and not get a lawsuit. So we need everything to be tangible.
Exactly. I wanted to find out why. And I also wanted to test it. And I kept wondering too, what happens if lots of people have the same thought at the same time? Does that magnify the effect? So I thought about it, and I thought, well, the field was in 30 languages by then. So I thought, well, I've got a lot of readers out there around the world. And then I also thought, well, I know a lot of scientists by now. So if I just put them together, I'm going to have the biggest global laboratory in the world, and we'll be able to test this. So what I did was set up a thing called the intention experiments, where I would ask one of the scientists, and I worked with scientists in very prestigious universities like University of Arizona, University of California, Penn State University, Princeton University. And I asked the scientists to set up a very controlled experiment.
Yes, I talked to Roger Nelson a few days ago, and he told me about the experiments that he did with you, with his REG.
Yes, exactly. So we were measuring the effect of consciousness as a field effect, and we were also creating controlled experiments in the lab. And we started out small. We wanted to just see if we could affect little effects on a plant. So one of the early experiments we did was trying to see if we could make seeds grow faster with our thoughts. And this was scientists from the University of Arizona. And they would send us 4 sets of photos of 4 sets of seeds, 30 seeds each. I would have my audience, either an actual audience if I were speaking somewhere, or my audience over the internet, to help me choose one of the sets of seeds. Then we'd all send intention to make those seeds grow faster.
Can you, elaborate a little? What do you mean by sending intention? Just thinking good thoughts, or saying any kind of mantra? What is it to send an intention?
It is a particular thought. I would post up on my website, or if I was speaking in front of an audience in PowerPoint, that would have a phrase. It would say, our intention is that these seeds grow 5 centimeters by the 5th day of growing, or something like that. We would have a very specific intention. So by that, I mean a very focused thought. And
so it's important, it's one of the things that you discovered with your experience, that the intention should be very specific?
Yes, that definitely came through in the work that we were doing, is the more specific, the better. Tell the universe what you want. And sometimes when we did ones where we just tried to send love to water or a plant or whatever, we didn't get much of an effect. So we found we got the biggest effects when we were very specific. So with the seed experiment, we'd send intention to one of the sets of seeds, let's say seeds A. We were just sending intention to the photo. We would then tell the scientists that we were done. They would then plant the seeds. They wouldn't know which ones we'd sent intention to. They'd measure them, and only when they were finished measuring them would we tell them which seeds we sent intention to. And we ran this particular experiment. We had 3 sets of controls as well as the seeds that were sent intention. And we ran it 6 different times, and every single time we did that, the seed sent intention grew significantly higher than controls.
Wow, that's
now,
amazing.
I know. Well, unpack this for a second. Think about the first time I did this study. I was in Sydney, Australia, in front of an audience of 700. I showed them not the actual seeds, but only a photographic representation of the seeds. The seeds were sitting back in Arizona, 8,000 miles away. Nevertheless, we had this effect. So it began to dawn on me that there's some sort of psychic internet that we can kind of create. We have that with the power of our consciousness. We have the power to affect things at enormous distances. And as I say, every single time we ran that experiment with in Rhinebeck, New York, in front of a smaller group, in South Carolina in front of a group of about 500, over the internet in Dallas, in California. Every single time we set intentions, the seeds grew, that's got the intention grew higher than the controls. So it was a very powerful experiment. We actually published that in a scientific journal.
So if you can affect, plants like this, and then maybe water, and maybe we can affect, as I know that you did all kinds of experiments to lower violence in all kinds of places in the world, and also here in Jerusalem to think about peace and communication and cooperation between all the nations and the people who live here.
Absolutely.
It's a very, Jerusalem is the best way to do it, because it's the place that the whole big traditions, are concentrated in.
Absolutely. Well, this is one reason we wanted to do Jerusalem. I mean, I had run by this time that we chose Jerusalem, I had run 4 peace intention experiments, 5 actually. The first one was 2008 with Sri Lanka, because we did lots of seed experiments, we did lots of water experiments, changing pH of water. And for me, I felt like, it's time to take a leap with human beings. Let's do something huge.
The appetite is growing, if you can affect a leaf, you can affect a nation, you can affect the world.
So let's see if we can. So I needed first to find a place where they were counting bodies and had been counting them for a long time. I needed a war where people were keeping records. And that's hard to find in an ongoing war, really hard. Even if they are counting the bodies, they usually don't reveal that. So I was looking and looking around the world and finally found Sri Lanka, which in 2008 had been in the middle of a ongoing 25-year civil war. And there were some organizations who were keeping careful record of the injuries and deaths. So I worked with a team of scientists, and they asked me to find 2 years worth of the casualty data from before our experiment and several months afterward. And the reason being, if you just look at the week after an intention experiment and the violence goes down, that's meaningless, really. That could just be chance. But if you look at a long-term trend, you can see if you've bucked the trend. If the trend was going up with violence and it suddenly goes down and it stays down for a while, then you can say, you're more likely to be able to say, oh, we've probably had an effect.
There is an effect, yes.
So we sent intention to this place, the north of Sri Lanka, which had been controlled by the rebel forces for some time, and they had choked off the entire north. So we sent intention to lower violence by a particular percentage too. We're always conscious of being, having a particular percentage and being careful about that and trying to quantify it. And to our horror, violence quadrupled over that week. But then it plummeted. Right afterward, it plummeted, and we noticed something very important. In that week, the government, which had been essentially losing, won a number of important, decisive battles that turned around the entire course of the war, it turned out. Within a few months, based on the battles of that week, they were able to take over the north again. And a few months after that, this 25-year war that nobody was winning was over. Now, it finished in a bloodbath, but it finished. And so
it's like when you take a homeopathic remedy, sometimes the disease becomes more, the symptoms become more, after it goes down. So
it was very bizarre. But when our scientific team looked at the whole 25-year course of the war, they found that possibly the most decisive battles had occurred just in our week of intention. Really amazing. So we, and as you say, with Dr. Roger Nelson, who measured the field effect afterward, we found there was a consistent big move away from randomness with his REG machines. That was really interesting. And when we looked closer, it occurred particularly just during the 10 minutes of our intention, which we had done every day at the same time for 8 days. And there is constantly that same signature on his REG machines.
Again, the number 8 that we will talk in a minute. I just want to ask you about, the field. I know you wrote the book, The Field, and ציפי is directing the movie, The One Field. And the experiment in Jerusalem was one of the experiments that will be in the field. And what was the mantra there? And what was the effect that you saw that happened?
Well, one of the interesting things to explain then, I want to explain what happened after Sri Lanka. I surveyed our participants. We had about 15,000 participants. And I surveyed them just to see what kind of experience they had. And I was shocked to find they had had a rebound effect in their lives. First of all, they felt amazingly connected. They said, people wrote back thousands of responses. I felt like I was part of a higher network. I had shivers along my arms and body. I was sobbing uncontrollably. And like that, but also they described feeling more peaceful in their own lives, that they had overcome certain estrangements in their families. They were nicer to their coworkers. They were, more loving to their families. They were in love with everybody they were coming in contact with. They were hugging strangers, basically.
So the people who send the energy, who send the intention, had that effect in their lives. Wow.
Exactly. Now, I found that over and over and over again. I found that when doing a 9/11 experiment for the 10th anniversary of 9/11, I had Muslims join in with Americans and other Westerners to send intention for peace in certain provinces of Afghanistan. And what I found was, afterward, on Facebook and my instant messengering pages, the Muslims and the Americans were connecting. They were talking to each other. They were forgiving each other. It was really extraordinary. And so with this Jerusalem experiment, what I was hoping was to see some sort of connection between Arabs and Israelis. So what we did was, it was very fortuitous, because I was about to do a 2-day summit with a fellow called Dr. Al-Rashid, Dr. Salah Al-Rashid.
Yes, I heard about him. I heard that he was the Deepak Chopra of the Arab world.
Exactly, he is. And he's a big peace proponent. And he has followers from all over the Arab world. So what we had was technology allowing us to beam into hotel conference rooms in 8 Arab countries. So we had everything from Kuwait to Saudi Arabia to Oman to Bahrain, et cetera, et cetera. And also we beamed into an auditorium in Jerusalem with Israelis.
Israelis and Arabs.
Israelis and Arabs taking part. Now, what I could see from the studio was every single screen all at the same time. And
you were in London.
I was in Southern England at the studio. So this studio has a lot of capability. So we sent intention to Jerusalem. And as you say, we chose Jerusalem because it belongs to everyone and it belongs to no one in a way. It's the home of the 3 world major religions. And everyone feels a connection to Jerusalem. It's so historic. So, and there has
I also say that if we can solve the peace in Jerusalem, then the world is a piece of cake.
Absolutely, absolutely. This has been going on so long. So we chose Jerusalem too because there had been an escalation of violence around the Damascus Gate area with increased security. So we thought, okay, let's send intention. So there I was in the studio with these 9 screens, so I could see everyone, and I led them in the usual intention to lower violence in the Damascus Gate area and to create peace. And afterward, because of these 8 screens, I have the ability to talk to each audience. They have the ability to talk back and to talk to the other screens too. So people started coming up to the mic. This was the most amazing thing. Sobbing, Arabs saying to the Israelis, I love you. The Israelis saying, your God is my God. And people sending love out, and one of the Israelis saying, all of us, we're all women, who are having similar experiences. Why can't we connect? And people were reaching out. They were becoming.
I have goosebumps as you're saying it. I have goosebumps all over my body.
It was
really
extraordinary.
rare.
It was extraordinary. I mean, I was sitting there with my mouth open. Salah was sitting there with his mouth open in the studio. Jean Houston, who's a very famous futurist, was there too. She was part of the summit I was going to be part of. And we were looking at each other saying, this is historic. This is amazing. And really what it takes, and probably all it takes, is this kind of what is essentially a secular prayer. We're all coming together and doing a secular prayer together. And that is transformational, not just to the outcome, but to the parties who are participating themselves. Probably that's more important than anything. Maybe we'll lower violence in Jerusalem, but what we're doing is creating peace in the hearts of all of the people who participate, and that will radiate out into the world, into peace.
So can you explain a little bit the behind screen? What is going on? How come you have this, amazing experience and results? What is the consciousness? What is the field? How does it all come together?
I have studied this in my book, The Power of Eight. In my book, The Power of Eight, I asked how this could be, and also I have experimented a lot with small groups of 8. It started in a workshop.
Yeah, do we need, in the spiritual world, they're speaking about the critical mass all the time, that we need, if enough people would meditate, if enough people would want peace and think about peace, then it will happen. But I think you're saying something new, that you don't need the group, a large quantity of group, to do it with 8 people.
Absolutely. And this I discovered by accident back in 2008 when I started running workshops. I wasn't really sure how to scale down those big intention experiments to small groups in a workshop. So I'm just kicking around the idea with my husband. And I said, I don't know what I'm going to do. Maybe I'll just put them in groups of 8 and see what happens. Have them send a healing intention to a member of the group with a health challenge. So we did this, and he said, oh, I love that. The Power of 8. He's a really good headline writer. So it was just, and, we started these workshops and we put people into groups, and I'm basically making it up as I'm going along. I'm saying now we have to hold hands. You have to all have the same intention statement. You have to do this, you have to do that. And I thought to myself, this is going to feel like a little feel-good effect, like getting a massage or something like that. It's not going to be big and transformational. But the next day when we had the people come back, they lined up, I gave them the mic in turn, and each of them said things like, I've had migraines my whole life, and today's the first day I have a clear head. I have no pain. Somebody else, I have terrible irritable bowel syndrome, and my stomach feels clear today, and there's no bloating. Somebody else said, I've had terrible arthritis, and I'm walking normally today. And so it went on and on and on, and I was completely shocked by this. And I thought, oh, maybe this is just a placebo effect. But in every workshop I ran from there on, and I've run thousands now, the same thing happened with people, the people sending intention. Well, people in the group would have these healings, but also the people sending intention would feel, if they had certain conditions, many of them were feeling better too. And it was, we had a woman with cataracts who said she was 80% better after being sent intention. We had another woman with multiple sclerosis who came in the next day without her crutches. We had people with terrible pain. One guy was a brace, his arm was in a brace, and the next day he came in, no brace, and he was moving his hand normally. We had a woman with stroke victim who couldn't see straight, and then suddenly she saw perfectly the next day. So again, I was really shocked. So my book is about why are these rebound effects? Why are these effects in the big and the small groups? And it's this. It's the power of intention and group intention. Yes, that's part of it. it's the power of the group coming together, the connection people feel. There are big brainwave changes.
So what you're saying that you can't do it by yourself or one-on-one? I know that there are healers that send healing across countries and oceans one-on-one, and it works.
Oh, yeah, you can do spiritual healing that way, definitely. But what I'm saying is these are people with no healing experience who come together in a group and they have these healings, and the people sending have no healing experience. What I think is required for this kind of intention work is a group of essentially any size. I mean, 8 is kind of a maximum number or an optimum number. You know, I always say it's like a Goldilocks number, not too little, not too much, you know, it's just perfect. You know, maybe under 5.
Is the infinity. And
of course, 8 is infinity. Yes, 8 is infinity, although it wasn't what I was thinking of when I thought of 8. You know, I wanted to make clear that I just stumbled on it. But yes, maybe there are no accidents. Maybe I didn't just stumble on it. But what's really powerful, I think there is the power of it is the group effect, but also another big piece of it is altruism, sending intention for something else. I looked at the science of altruism. It's all in my book, The Power of 8. And it's like a bulletproof vest, Orly. Altruism, doing things for other people isn't just a feel-good thing. People who do things for other people live longer, are healthier, are happier in every regard. And one study looking at prayer for people with depression, this was run by a priest, a psychologist priest, who wanted to see if you could use prayer to help people with depression. So he recruited 400 plus people with clinical depression, divided them into 2 groups. One group got the prayer, and the other group did the praying. And afterward, he looked through all these markers, you know, to measure how they had done. And the people who got the prayer did better. You know, they were better, they were improved, but not as improved as the people who had done the praying. Their improvement was off the charts. So I think a big piece of this is that there's also, I did a brainwave study. We wanted to find out what's going on in these small groups. So Life University, which is the largest chiropractic university in the world, offered to put their psychology department at my disposal so that we could study what's going on with these small groups. And we did 7 studies. And we found that every time the senders, as well as the receivers, have major brainwave changes. They are a global quieting in the part of the brain, the parietal lobes, the executive front of the lobes, that distinguish self from not self. In other words, they're the things that make us feel separate. And also the part of the frontal lobes that were turned down too, with a part involved with worry, doubt, negativity. So what this is a brainwave signature absolutely identical to brainwave signatures of people like Sufi masters and Buddhist monks in ecstatic prayer. These are people who are experiencing a feeling of ecstatic oneness. And that kind of filters out into their life afterward. You know, it's like having a mystical experience and having that affect you afterward. That seems to be the effect of what's happening. And certainly we saw it in the extraordinary effects with the Jerusalem experiment, people crying, people having these incredible emotional experiences. They were feeling the power of oneness.
Yes, so the new science, really, you're talking about the new science. And what does the new science bring that is new comparing to the old science? Why is it like a prophecy? It's like a prophecy, you know, you can change the world just by intending or just by thinking good thoughts.
Okay, the old science defined us, and we're talking about an old, you know, we have to understand with science, you know, we think of science as a finite truth. Oh, we've discovered this, that's the truth for all time. But science is just a story told in installments. We learn something about the universe, and then oftentimes we get a new chapter that rewrites what's happened before. And we're in the middle of rewriting the whole book, because what we've been doing is operating according to a story essentially written by Isaac Newton 300 plus years ago that described this very well-behaved universe of individual and separate objects that operate according to fixed laws in time and space. In other words, it really defines separateness. It defines you and me as being separate.
And competing with each other for survival.
Well, and that's the other piece of it, absolutely. It defines us as being, we end with the hair on our skin, and the rest of the universe begins after that. But the other piece of this was the work of Charles Darwin, who said, essentially, there's not enough to go around, so we better, get there first. He defined life as an experience of competitive individualism. So we have this individualism from Newton and competition from Darwin, and the idea that really life has to be about I win, you lose. But the new science coming through is showing that we as human beings, and also in our biology, and also our relationship to the world and the world itself, are very different from what we've been told. It talks about much more of a unity, that we are on the lower level of our being, the quantum level. We are all connected via an enormous universal field, the thing I call the field. And also that consciousness is probably out there, part of this field that we access, that is not locked inside our head.
You talk about consciousness like it's an entity, like it's an entity that
it is all things. It is all things. But we know it's not locked inside our heads, because there's been many studies of people with near-death experiences or out-of-body experiences or coma victims where the brain was essentially turned off. So if consciousness is brain, if consciousness is like a computer program, you're talking about a point where the computer is unplugged, but still consciousness is going on, because they find afterward people who are in comas, near-death experiences, have complete consciousness of everything that went on during the time they were supposedly dead.
Yes, I interviewed a few years ago Anita Morjani, who had a near-death experience.
Yes.
And she was telling me that, that she was somewhere and she saw herself on the bed, and she heard the talks between the doctor and her family. So she was very conscious, but she was in the doctors, she was dead.
Absolutely. Well, this is it. There's more and more evidence of this, where people who had near-death experiences have complete awareness of everything going on. Wonderful guy called Dr. Pim van Lommel, who's a Dutch scientist, has recorded, he's a doctor, and he is and a cardiologist. He's recorded many situations of near-death experiences where his patients had complete consciousness. When they were supposedly dead, they knew who had taken their clothes off, or if they were getting dressed to be, for emergency medicine, they knew where their clothes were. They had complete consciousness of everything going on. So we have an idea now that consciousness is all pervasive. It's not locked inside our skulls. And also there are many scientists believing that a lot of our higher cognitive functions are out there in the field, that our brain is much more of a receiver transmitter than a repository of information. We're understanding that we have far greater human capacity than has been described by Newton and Darwin, that we have a great capacity to affect, that consciousness is very powerful. We have the ability to affect. We have the ability to receive information beyond our senses. There is an enormous body of evidence now, and I'm not talking about just esoteric stuff. I'm talking about hard science demonstrating this in laboratories.
And it's also connected to the power of the heart, because you say we have to intend, and we get excited and we get all passionate about what we intend. So it's even more.
Absolutely. I think the heart is a really interesting mechanism too, because they're finding that the heart is like a little mini brain too. And it's one of the first organs that receives information and then oftentimes shoots it up to the brain. So we are learning to be much more conscious of what we call intuition and to understand the heart's intelligence. So what this is really saying is that our biology, our human capacity, is far greater than we've been told. Our human ability to do things is far grander, and that we have been sold the wrong story. And the wrong story is really part of so much of the damage that happens to us, of the conflict that we experience. Is really all about I win, you lose. You know, there's not enough, so we've got to fight for our own survival.
We see it in the world. We see all the violence, we see all the wars. It's a consequence of the consciousness that we were taught.
Exactly. It's because we were given the wrong story. And so a new story is being written. And that's one of the things that I've been interested in the last 4 books, is writing this new story and enabling people to understand the extraordinary capacity they have for healing, but for everything. That they're part of a much more interesting world. And that world is, and they are inextricably connected.
So how does this connection happen? Talking scientifically or quantumly, how does it happen? You know, I know that we are talking now, you're sitting in England, in London, and I'm sitting here in Tel Aviv, and there are millions of people and maybe thousands of people that are watching or will watch it sometimes. What is the mechanism that combines all that make it united, that make it the one field?
Okay, let me explain what I mean by the field. And I'm talking about what scientists have discovered. So this isn't just a supposition. We know this because of hard science. Some of the frontier physicists that I have worked with and have interviewed discovered something that has been left behind in quantum physics. When we talk about 2 subatomic particles, we think of them as little billiard balls. You know, that's how we see them in physics classes, right? They're little billiard balls, but they're not like that. Subatomic particles are a vibrating packet of energy. They're like a shapeshifter, and they're constantly trading energy with other subatomic particles in an endless game of energy exchange. It's like an endless game of tennis. Now, that little energy exchange creates what's called a virtual particle. And that's a particle that just comes in less than the blink of an eye and then it's gone. That's a little piece of energy. Now, the energy between just 2 subatomic particles is teeny weeny. But when you add up all of the subatomic particles trading energy in all the things in all the universe, you come up with this unbelievable, unfathomable amount of energy sitting there in empty space. It's like a supercharged backdrop. If you were sitting 1 meter away from me, the space between us, the energy in the space between us would be enough to boil all the oceans of the world. That's how energy dense empty space is. Now, there are 2 interesting aspects to this field, and the scientists call it 0-point field because all of that energy that's created creates a field, a connected field. Now, they call it the 0-point field because this little energy dance that goes on between subatomic particles happens even in temperatures of near absolute zero. They never stop moving. When everything else slows down, this still happens. So there's 2 implications here of the idea that there's this ground state field. First of all, subatomic particles aren't just particles, they're waves. They connect onto infinity, right? So here's a mechanism to demonstrate how at some subatomic level, we are all connected. But the second piece of this that's really interesting is that subatomic particles, and by the way, if we're all connected and we're connected to this ground state of energy, we also have the capacity to get all the information within it, to access it. Now, the other interesting thing about this field is that when 2 subatomic particle, or waves as they are when they're stretched out, bump into each other, they take on each other's information. And waves have an infinite capacity to store information. And so what scientists postulate is that this field is like a mothership of all information that ever was, all there in this backdrop. And there is enormous capacity to store energy. For instance, the Library of Congress, which is, got every book that's ever been written, could fit on a sugar cube. In this field, it could fit in a space the size of a sugar cube. So there's an infinite capacity to store information. So if this is true, it's a mechanism by which we are all connected and we have access to all information. So it's a little mechanism to demonstrate how we could have access to all this other information, how we can reach beyond our senses.
Okay, so how can we take this, this new science that you're talking about and put it into everyday life?
Well,
how can I use it now?
Okay. Well, first of all, you have to acknowledge that you are not just this, that your information that you receive doesn't end with your five senses, that you have the capacity to pick up things beyond your senses. And it's about reteaching yourself. I mean, I give many classes on this, both intention and also things like, into developing your intuition and cultivating your intuition and your ability to see and to access information beyond your senses. And we find, even people who have never tried this before, they practice a few times and they find they can pick up other people's thoughts from thousands of miles away, et cetera, et cetera. So it's about relearning something that's already innate in you. And, other cultures, more indigenous cultures, understand this. They make use of these abilities. And it's about understanding what we have and then learning how to use it again.
Yeah, it's like this old knowledge or wisdom is coming back today, but now we can have scientific proof for it.
Exactly.
So,
I think that's the interesting thing. We're not just talking about esoteric traditions. We're now talking about hard science. And I mean, there's
so now the bridging that you and other scientists do between the spiritualism and the science is really making people now more understand more what is going on in the world and the new story of the world.
Absolutely. And people are now, more and more people are understanding that we're, again, very different from what we're told. And people are ready for a new story because they're ready for a new story in many, many other areas of life. The younger generation are very fed up with the I win, you lose mentality because they see just a small group of privileged individuals who are the I wins and everybody else is the you loses. And so they want something very different. They're looking for much more fairness. They're looking for a very different way, a much more interconnected way. And that really is tying into this new story.
So what is, when you look forward, like 5 years, 10 years from now, what is your vision for the world, for this new science, for its application in the world?
I have great faith in the young people. Unlike what most people are saying, millennials are actually very socially activist. It was very interesting in New York. I was there in December. There was a socialist magazine that ran a debate called The Future of Capitalism. And they had socialists on one side and libertarians on the other, debating the capitalism. And that event sold out in a few hours, 450 seats, mostly people under 30. They then enlarged the capacity of the place. They chose a new venue with twice the capacity. That sold out in a few hours too. There is a real hunger to just take things right back to basics and say, is this the right? mechanism by which we should live? Is this the right system for us now? And you're finding this political activism, you're finding people asking, this younger generation saying, we want fairness, we want honesty in business, we want a whole bunch of other things. And so I think we're looking at an amazing time of transition where that new story is going to be adopted. You know, it's going to be messy. It's going to be messy. The breakdown of everything is messy. I mean, witness, you know, Trump in my country.
Do you believe that, you know, the old story was some kind of a conspiracy of a group of people, you know, to control people, to enslave them and to enjoy the benefit?
No, I don't think it was a deliberate conspiracy. I think it was just convenient. I mean, for instance, Darwin. Hitler loved Darwin. You know, I mean, Darwin appealed to people who were involved in colonialism too. The idea that one race was superior to another. That was perfect for them. That was the great story that justified sociopathic behavior, you know. So I don't think it was a conspiracy. I think it was just, you know, Adam Smith with economics believed that, you know, you do best for society by looking out for number one, looking out for yourself first. We're now realizing that's not true. You know, you do best for yourself by looking out for someone else. You know, that's definitely demonstrated in the work that I do with the Power of Eight. So I think that the whole idea of community, of interconnection, you know, is starting to come together. And with that will be new societal creations. You know, when I wrote The Field, I said, look, if we're not separate, you know, we have to change everything. You know, we have built all of our societal creations on the idea that we're separate and competitive. If that's not true, if the real underlay of our being, we're all connected via this quantum field, then that changes everything. Then we have to really rethink how we're living, how we're bringing up our children.
Yeah, you know, it's like we are all in this big boat, and if something in Africa is sinking the boat, you know, the starving children or the war in Afghanistan or something else, we understand that it does concern us, and it should concern us. And we should resolve the whole world. You know, I'm a student of the Course in Miracles, and the Course in Miracles, it says that we go to the higher consciousness or to God. We go together. We can't leave anybody behind us. We can't leave the lame or the sick or the vicious people. We need to take them with us.
Yes, and look how simple it is. Look how simple it is. This is what people don't get. You know, people think, oh, this is complicated, etc. But look how simple it was with our Jerusalem experiment. We had hundreds and hundreds of people participating, and with one 10-minute group prayer, where people came together and had a sense of unity and felt what that feels like, that sense of unity, as they do with the intention experiments and Power of Eight, it changes everything. We suddenly have Israelis sending love to Arabs and Arabs sending love back to Israelis. You know, it was that simple. We don't need politicians, you know, trying to carve out this and do that. We need a group prayer. We need both sides to just come together in prayer and watch what happens.
So tell me, how do you think that each one of us has like a role? Like you have your role and I have my role. You know, in the coaching business, they call it life purpose. So how can every one of us can, you know, get attached with his life purpose, with his role in this big boat that we are on, and you know, move it forward to the next phase, to the next stage?
Well, I think that's a really interesting question because, you know, in my workshops where I run a year-long masterclass every year, and I do teaching for 6 weeks, and then we put people into groups for an entire year. And Actually, we have a bunch of Israelis coming to this year's one, which starts January 27th. So when I monitor people, I put them into groups and I monitor them week after week after week to find out what's going on with them, what's changing among four things: their health, their relationships, their career, and their life purpose. And there isn't anybody I know of who talks about, my life purpose is to make a lot of money. You know, their life purpose, when they seek to look at what they want to do, it almost invariably is wanting to be a life of service, wanting to be of service in some way. Now, that can be anything. It doesn't have to be being president. It doesn't have to be, you know, being the head of a corporation or head of a foundation. It can be also making the perfect chocolate cake. You know, it's just being of service. And I think that what you really understand when you realize we're all interconnected, we're all part of this giant, vast organism, is that you're playing your part is one cog in there of just helping the whole. And then once you get that, I think that does change everything.
Yeah, I think that this is the missing link, you know, to really make that the world would make a quantum leap, that everybody would understand that your role is not bigger than mine, or our role is not bigger than the person who is, you know, sweeping the streets, because we are all making our own function to help the big ship to move on, to move to the next phase. Absolutely. I think, you know, when you do understand that sense of unity, that does change everything, and experience it. And the great thing about the Power of Eight is you can create your own Power of Eight group. We have hundreds and hundreds of people doing that on our website. If they want to they just put up in my forum, LynneMcTaggart.com/forum, where their time zone is, and then have people connect. And what's so great about it is, you know, most people, when they think of spiritual practices, think you need years of practice to become a Sufi master, or you need hours of priming to get into a state of unity, you know, as you do if you're chanting or doing something like that. But what I've discovered with the Power of Eight is people get into those amazing brain states in minutes. You know, so you don't need ayahuasca, you don't need a sweat lodge, you don't need years of discipline training. You just need a small group. And that is your passport, essentially your fast track to the miraculous. And you don't need to be an expert, not in meditation and not in
No.
And it can be online, as you say. You don't have
many of my groups, most of my groups in my master classes never meet. They'll meet every week on Skype or Google Hangouts. They've never actually met, and yet this is their intention family. They've got each other's backs, and they are intending for each other and transforming their lives.
Wow, it sounds amazing. So, Lynne, you know, we have to wrap it up because we are finished. Our hour is finished. And, you know, the show is called Practical Inspiration. So we had the inspiration. And now I want to ask you if you have like something that you can give, a tool, maybe to join the group of 8.
Okay.
And, that, you know, people can hear this conversation and they say, okay, this I can apply tomorrow morning or this minute into my life and make it better in some way.
Absolutely. Well, I would say get a group of 8. It doesn't have to be exactly 8. 8 is kind of optimum, but you can have 6, you can have 10. Get this group of 8 together and practice, and you can do it online too. And as I say, you can join a group on my forum, LynneMcTaggart.com/forum. And just get this group and have them meeting regularly, sending intention for each other, and watch what happens both to you and with the group. And what I'm talking about is just deciding on the intention that you're going to send. Always make it our intention. Our intention is that Jane Doe be free of all pain in her right hip and be healthy and well in every way. Make it very specific. Send intention to also be healthy and well in every way to cover everything else. Hold that intention together for about 10 minutes and watch and see what happens. It's that simple.
And for each session that we meet, we make one intention only for 10 minutes?
You can make others, but I would hold each of them for about 10 minutes. And imagine yourself, if you're on Skype, imagine yourself holding hands. You're all connected. If you're actually connected, if you're there together, hold hands in a circle.
To transform the energy from one another.
Yeah.
Great. So, Lynne McTaggart, thank you very much for your wisdom and for your participating in the Practical Inspiration Show and bringing your message here to Tel Aviv, to Jerusalem, to Israel. And we hope to see you in Israel. Are you not coming soon?
I hope to come. I hope to come soon, definitely. I spoke there years ago. Really with What Doctors Don't Tell You. It must have been about 18 years ago, but I'd love to come back. Jerusalem to me was the most transformational, amazing place. So I'd love to see it. And people can visit me at my website, lynnmctaggart.com.
lynnmctaggart.com. So Lynne, thank you very much. And I hope to see you very soon here in Israel. I know that for me and people like me, we are ready to hear what you have to say and to learn and really to go to our next step.
Thank you so much.
Of elevating consciousness in the world.
Thank you.
So thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.